Welcome, everyone. I'm Jo Carol Hyatt at MDIC, and very, very pleased to welcome our newest session in the annual public forum, a town hall with our colleagues from CMS. And as this is the first time we've had multiple participants from CMS, I'd like to very quickly introduce my colleagues who are with me today, and then we will go into a discussion of what their responsibilities are within the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and a number of great topics that we have for you today. So let me start with Steve Farmer.
Hi, I'm Steve Farmer, Chief Strategy Officer in the Coverage and Analysis Group. It's at the Center for Clinical Standards and Quality.
Thank you. Tamara.
Hi, I'm Tamara Sarek Jensen, and I am the director of the Coverage and Analysis Group, and I work with Steve and Jason very closely on moving coverage policy and working with the FDA, among other things.
And Jason Bennett, who leads a relatively new group within CMS, which is why we're going to start with Jason talking about his role and his organization. Jason?
Thank you, Dr. Hyatt. My name is Jason Bennett. I am the acting director of the Technology Coding and Pricing Group in the Center for Medicare, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. And at a later point, Tamara and I will discuss how we work together collaboratively on issues involving Medicare payment, coding, and coverage, and why that may be of interest to you. As Dr. Hyatt was saying, we are a new group within the Center for Medicare, focusing on payment and coding issues related to products that are coming into the market and that may be available for Medicare beneficiaries. One of the reasons that we did this reorganization is that, as many of you know, products are increasingly complex, and they relate to multiple different aspects across the Medicare landscape. And so we have had staff, particularly in our hospital and ambulatory policy group, with which many of you may have worked in the past, working on a broad range of issues, everything from hospital graduate medical education to the adoption of new technologies, to physician payment, to drug policy payment, and many, many other things. And we reached a stage where we felt that we needed to focus our efforts a little differently and bring together our teams from across our work a little differently. So we are a focal point in particular for products that are entering Medicare or that may be pursuing a Medicare coverage and payment, and we focus on the payment aspects of that. One of the first stops that I would recommend anyone making is to contact our team at Medicare Innovation at cms.hhs.gov. And again, that's Medicare Innovation at cms.hhs.gov. This group of individuals, which is led by James Bailey, is a great entry point for working with all of us, including Tamara. And they can help make sure that we're getting information that will be of interest to you, but that if you're looking for a meeting with us at CM, that we're pulling together the right team, because it may involve colleagues of mine in TCPG, in the Technology Coding and Pricing Group, or it may involve colleagues from other areas as well, and sometimes colleagues from multiple areas at once. And so they help us to really be efficient and bring together the right team. But in the Technology Coding and Pricing Group, we're often working on at least, on average, one new application per business day. That's just a sign for how much interest and demand and innovation that's occurring in the marketplace today. Most new products will engage with us in one of three areas. We have a division of new technology, which looks at various add-on payment adjustments for new technologies that are eligible for hospital inpatient, hospital outpatient, or end-stage renal disease, as well as advanced diagnostic laboratory tests and a special designation that can be associated there. In addition, colleagues may engage with us in our coding work. We have the Division of Coding and Diagnosis Related Groups that focuses in particular on coding issues. So one thing to think about when discussing whether a code is appropriate to describe a product that you may be developing is whether it is paid separately traditionally, and how and in what form or fashion it may be. So first to understand about coding is that level 1 codes are developed by the American Medical Association. So you should consider whether your product may be most appropriately described in a level 1 code. And those are typically services or products that are part of a clinician's care for the patient, particularly in, let's say, something like a doctor's office. CMS then picks up coding in terms of, CMS then addresses coding in terms of level 2, which is in many ways what is not covered by level 1. So that may be an area with which you would want to engage with us. Also, we're involved in the ICD-10 coding for the procedure codes, and we work with the CDC on diagnosis codes. So those may be reasons to engage with us. And in addition, we work on durable medical equipment, prosthetics, orthotics, and supplies, and the introduction of new products like that into the Medicare landscape. And so those may be 3 areas with which you would specifically engage with us in Medicare and in TCPG. And so with that, I will turn it back over to Dr. Hyatt for the next segment.
Thank you, Jason. That was a great introduction to a very complicated area. And I had my clinical career. I was blessed to not have to worry too much about coding. I know the world has changed for my former colleagues, and my sympathies to them. So next we'd like to go to Tamara for what is, I know, top of mind for many in our audience, the Medicare Coverage for Innovative Technologies opportunity, which, as was announced a few days ago, is currently further delayed. And Tamara is going to share what she can. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting us today. So as you just said, the Medicare Coverage of Innovative Technologies has been delayed until December 15th. We issued this final rule on May 15th. And if, I don't know, Joe Carroll, if you can share the link for anyone in the audience if they need it, we can certainly share that with you to share with them. But I think if you read the final rule, you will say that we have some things that we need to continue to consider. And we gave ourselves enough time to work out all of those issues. And then as well, as many of you may know, our new administrator was, we just got a new administrator as of yesterday. And so it is very exciting to be able to brief her on this new rule and then figure out next steps with this new rule. So do we continue with the way it is and let it go effective on or before December 15th? Do we revise the rule where the commenter said that maybe we need some tweaks to this rule? Or do we rescind the rule? All of those, I'm not saying we're going to do any particular one of those. Those are just some of the options that are on the table. And I think we as a team are very excited to introduce this rule to the new administrator, get her point of view, and then quickly move forward so that the stakeholders will know what the agency is going to do. And I would mention that while we delayed the rule until December 15th, it doesn't mean that we could not as an agency do something sooner than that. we wanted to give ourselves enough time to be able to get everything done that needed to get done if we were to change anything, and not issue another delay. So I would encourage the audience, everybody in the audience, to read the final rule, and so that you get an idea of some of the questions that we continue to have around implementation and around some of the evidence review for certain types of technologies. So, Joe Carroll, let me stop there to see if you have any further questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Tamara. I think that it's also, I believe, accurate to state that there's nothing that precludes pursuing coverage with evidence development and other pathways for breakthrough technologies in the interim. It does not have to await December 15th or whenever an official decision is announced. There are other paths to coverage. Is that accurate?
Yes, and thank you for bringing that up. So, right. So we still have our current pathways. So there isn't anything now that says that any device is non-covered. So you still have claim by claim adjudication, and we do have data to demonstrate that the current devices that have been approved by the FDA that would fit within the MCIT rule, there are claims that have been paying for those. So you have claim by claim adjudication. Certainly there is a local coverage determination, and you can ask us for a national coverage determination. As far as coverage with evidence development, that is still a policy option for anything we do on the national level under a national coverage determination. And our last coverage with evidence development, we did tier. So that was on, I think, around January 16th or 17th. So coverage with evidence development is still an option for all of us.
Thank you. So as you've heard, there's an opportunity for considerable collaboration between Tamara's group and Jason's group. So let's turn now to how they work together and what the opportunities are. Jason, are you back?
I am, thank you. Yes, Tamara and I and our colleagues work very closely together on a number of issues. And part of that is understanding how Medicare thinks about coverage. Much of what you're engaging with Tamara and her team on is one aspect of coverage in terms of a product or service or care being reasonable and necessary for a beneficiary in Medicare fee-for-service. However, there is another aspect of coverage that is also important, and in some respects, it's often a threshold question that must be considered alongside any reasonable and necessary determination. And that's what's known as the benefit category or benefit category determination. We call that BCD. And what that means is that, in essence, the Medicare statute allows for a product or service to be paid for by Medicare. And that is a critical question to then assessing coverage. So with our benefit categories, we're assessing where in the statute a product or a service could be paid. Will it be in a hospital outpatient setting, perhaps incident to a physician visit? It might be a standalone item of durable medical equipment. It might be something that's non-covered, like a hearing aid, which is statutorily non-covered, or certain vision wear, like the glasses that I'm wearing, are non-covered by Medicare by statute. And so these are important questions that have to be considered and addressed when we make certain payment determinations, but also certain coverage determinations. And that often is what brings Tamara and I together, or CAG and TCPG together, is working on these types of issues. We also may be involved in some questions in terms of when we're doing certain substantial clinical improvement assessments that relate to the introduction of new technologies for certain add-on payments. And there may be some collaborative work in that respect. And so our teams are often working together to engage on these types of questions and to try to do so in a productive way, because it may be necessary to answer both the benefit category, the BCD question, as well as the reasonable and necessary questions for the issuance of a national coverage determination, for instance.
So let me just add on to Jason. So one, Jason is relatively new to CMS, and that is a fairly subjective point of view since I've been with the coverage group a little over a decade. And I think Jason has been in TCPG or in CMS for a few years. But I really wanted to, one, say anyone that doesn't know Jason, he is a true value to CMS. So you should all know his name, because he does bring a lot of really great ideas and good experience to CMS. And I think working with him, we are really trying to move forward this idea that many of you have brought to the table of, coverage, coding, and payment, and really trying to kind of pull back the veil of how do you navigate CMS to get one, coverage when that is what is asked for, and then coding, and then payment. And I think a lot of what we've heard from stakeholders is they have a question. They may not be getting what they need, and so they assume it perhaps is a coverage issue. But maybe once we talk with you and we figure out, okay, really, where is the problem? Perhaps it's not necessarily a coverage issue, but it might be a coding issue. Maybe there isn't a code for it, or it might not be the code that you thought was there, or maybe you're looking for a new code. Or it could be there's already a code, and it may fit under a payment system, but maybe there's an LCD or an NCD that non-covers it. And so one of the goals that we have as TCPG was being stood up, and it is still a relatively new group, and so, which is really exciting. And so there's a lot of leeway here on how we can together to work with stakeholders to find these paths so that we can get these questions answered. And so as Jason has just, I think, did a really nice job of saying, you may not have, what is the statutory category? And then once we figure that out, is there a coverage problem? Maybe there's not, but kind of working on that together. And so that it's not, let's go talk to the coverage group. We've got those answers. We think we know the answer. So now let's go talk with our CM colleagues and figure out, okay, what payment system should we go under? Is there a code for all of that? And so what the navigators have really done a nice job with, and again, we're in the beginning, and so it's a bit of a pilot, and we're trying to figure out how we can improve all of this, is the navigators are bringing all of us together to listen to what is going on, listen to maybe new devices, what is the new product, and trying to answer the questions together. So one, I think it's not only does it create some efficiencies for CMS, I think that it also creates efficiencies for the stakeholders as well, so that we pull away some of the mystery of how you navigate CMS. I will say this may not answer all of the questions that you need, or it may be answers that you perhaps do not want to hear, but we're having this conversation together. And so I think it's a true collaboration so that we can work on these problems or milestones together. And so I think the key to all of this is really transparency and predictability on how you might get covered under Medicare.
Thank you, Tamara. I was actually going to quote something you said a few days ago, which you just repeated in part. Transparency breeds confidence in the data. So thank you for bringing that up. Jason, if you wouldn't mind, I know that we have people in the audience who have a lot of experience working with CMS and understand the regulatory process thoroughly, but I believe there are a number that don't really have that expertise. If you could just take a moment to explain a little more about what benefit categories are potentially not in scope for CMS today. And I believe there were some adjustments due to COVID with some relaxation of payment opportunities for things that had been previously excluded. I probably didn't say that as correctly as you will.
Sure. Yeah, I'll take those two questions slightly separately. And I'd like to add to Tamara's remarks too, that one of the best ways to engage with us and figure out where the particular questions are or where the challenges may be is to first reach out to Medicare Innovation at cms.hhs.gov. And that's the team of our navigators with James Bailey, who really are helping facilitate in bringing the right team together. And just for example, this last week, there was a particular question that came his way that he was able to work through. It involved 4 different teams across 3 different groups, and it turned out to be a very isolated edit related to the claims processing system, but that is not at all where one would have thought to start looking. That's where the work took us, and so he and his team were able to do that research in a period of time that was much faster than what would have occurred prior to some of our reorganization and our more collaborative work together. In terms of benefit categories, it really there's a couple places to think about and look in the statute and read through our regulatory text, and MLN articles can be a good source of this. The different parts of Medicare are set up predominantly under a prospective payment system or a fee schedule. And those are described in statute and describe the types of services or products that are covered and that have a benefit category. Sometimes it's very vague terms or very non-specific terms like incident to, and how has Medicare interpreted that and applied that, is based on our precedent and our regulatory history. In another part of the statute, it says very specifically products that are excluded from payment and coverage, like hearing aids and vision wear. And so those are sort of a hard no, so to speak, whereas the other part of the statute may provide some information about where things could be more of a yes. And of course, there can be interpretations of that, different interpretations of that. And so we do engage with stakeholders on how we may think about the statutory terms differently. And as healthcare evolves, so too does our thinking about the statute and our regulatory history that's associated there. So that's part of an approach that we recommend one could take for benefit category determinations. The other thing that I recommend is look for the closest product or service that is as similar to what you're offering or introducing as possible, and see how Medicare pays for that. That's a pretty good indication of where we may go. Though we know that in some cases, we're really talking about novel technologies, things that are very new to the healthcare system. And so the precedent may not be as clear. In terms of COVID, I actually think that's been one of the areas where we really have worked collaboratively across the Medicare space. The statute, for instance, provided us very specific new benefit category for COVID-19 vaccinations. Our process for how Medicare would have covered and paid for a preventative service is slightly different than just having the specific statutory authority that Congress provided in this emergency. And also the approach that we have taken with monoclonal antibodies as a potential therapy has been very collaborative and very much in real time as we have undertaken that. And there are some Medicare authorities, such as certain telehealth um, um, flexibilities that are specific to the public health emergency, where the statute does provide Medicare fee-for-service with more flexibility than we had prior to the public health emergency, and then we would have a post-public health emergency should the statutory authorities remain similar.
Thank you, Jason. That was really helpful. So, Tamara, your comments were terrific. Thank you very much. We're going to give you a bit of a break. And Jason, we're going to hand this over to you for a topic that I have been baffled by for years, really trying to understand durable medical equipment and prosthetics, orthotics, and supplies, and how things are covered or not covered. So I understand you have some news for us on that front.
Yeah, I don't know that I have anything new, but happy to provide an update as I can, just as Tamara did with MSIT. Durable medical equipment, prosthetics, orthotics, and supplies. I one time heard a colleague refer to it as the archipelago of benefit categories. And I think that may be, Joe Carroll, some of what you're referring to there, as it's has a lot of mystery or variability to it. I don't know that it's so much mystery as it just is that the products are very different. Durable medical equipment, which is part of a main part of that, is typically a product that we've defined by regulation that is durable, which means that it is something that that you can physically hold and touch, and that I can use and you can use and the person next to you can use. Where think here in terms of something like a walker or a hospital bed or certain oxygen equipment. It's also something that you use on your own in the home, and that is primarily medical in nature. So you're using it in your home, and you do not need a clinician or a medical professional or healthcare professional to be with you in the home while you're using that product. And so it's something that you would be typically using on a fairly regular basis, and that you would be using in your own home. And a good example of this is continuous glucose monitors and insulin infusion pumps. These are devices. The insulin infusion pump is a product that has a reasonable useful life of at least 3 years. And you are making the decision based on perhaps on your reading from a continuous glucose monitor or a blood glucose meter in terms of whether you should be increasing or decreasing your insulin or taking it at a different time. You don't have to consult a clinician about your day-to-day administration in that way because of the durable medical equipment that you have available and your ability to use that directly in the home. Of course, you're probably engaging with a clinician on your regular care for that, but not necessarily on the day-to-day delivery of the care. And that's what partially makes durable medical equipment distinct from some of the other benefit categories and other services that you see in Medicare. In terms of the proposed and final rule, we did issue a proposed rule on November 4th of last year. It covered a number of areas, including how we are thinking about approaching benefit category determinations for DME posts, items and services, and how we would do that for the introduction of new technologies. We also had a proposal in there about how we're thinking about continuous glucose monitors, for example. And so we are in the process of reviewing those public comments. And as Tamara mentioned, we have a new administrator and bringing her up to speed on what those proposals were and what the comments are that we received and what approach that we may take going forward on those proposals.
So thank you, Jason. I have a question. I know that sometimes you mentioned the insulin pumps and continuous glucose monitors. Let me ask about something where there are implanted products, cardiac defibrillator, for example, where there is also available an external vest defibrillator. Where did that, what covers what in that circumstance? The implanted device, I believe, is completely separate from durable medical equipment because it's fully implanted. But I think that the vest could theoretically fall under durable medical equipment. Is that accurate?
So it very much depends on the purpose of the products and how they may relate together. We definitely would look at whether the two products work together, whether they work separately. There's some past precedent on how we've treated products in the nature of what you've described. Also, what's the useful life, the reasonable useful life of those. Some of the products themselves might actually be more appropriately thought of as a prosthetic, which is a different than durable medical equipment. So it could well depend on what's the nature and use of the individual device. And as you noted, many of these devices are implanted, so they may well be covered under the physician fee schedule or the hospital outpatient benefit, or perhaps if it required an inpatient procedure, the hospital inpatient benefit. And so all of those aspects are things that we need to consider. And part of and I think that illustrates the complexity of the environment that we're in now. It's not just simply that we're talking about things that are entirely implanted or entirely used at home, but where there may be components of the same device that sort of straddle two different ways of how the statute or the Medicare program may have thought about a product.
Yeah, thank you. And many of these now have incorporated artificial intelligence, other software kinds of components. How would you approach those? Because I believe that artificial intelligence is currently somewhat out of bounds for coverage. Is that correct?
Certainly, artificial intelligence is one of the fastest growing and most and newest areas to Medicare and healthcare in general. And I think we're still all getting our arms around what it is and how it's going to be used in the healthcare settings. I think FDA is doing something similar. Our analysis on artificial intelligence really does begin with that question of where is the benefit category, which, in other words, where is it used? How is it being used? I've seen some discussions of artificial intelligence where it's used in a diagnostic purpose or used in interpreting or reading diagnostic results. Other cases I've heard of it more of software that's looking in, say, a hospital setting at certain readings that a patient may have and predicting where that may be. And so the first question is really, what's that setting of use and that approach that is there? And for instance, we have covered, I believe, at least one or two AI types of products in the Medicare inpatient hospital setting that qualified for new technology add-on payment, and we have a couple others that are pending and in the proposed rule that is out for public comment at this time, and individuals may want to take a look at that and offer comment. So it really starts with that question of where is it being used and how is it being used that describes what's the potential manner or ways with which Medicare may make a payment.
Great, thank you. Well, I want to loop back to the recommendation to contact the team, the navigation team, and we will be providing that link so that everybody can do that. I've had the privilege of talking with James Bailey. He's extremely dedicated to doing this well and a terrific resource. So congratulations on including him on your team, Jason. That was a brilliant decision. So I'd like to now introduce Steve Farmer. And Steve is a cardiologist who has been working on Tamara's team. And I don't think it's because Steve is there, but many of the potential candidates for MSIT and other breakthrough changes and new technologies do land in the field of cardiology for some reason. There's a great deal of evolution of technology there. So Steve, can you share with us your perspective, please?
Thank you so much, Dr. Hyatt, for having me back at MDIC again. I was delighted to participate in the MDIC Real World Evidence Public Forum on April 20th. And I think that there were some really interesting contributions from the FDA, Anthem, and faculty from Northwestern and Harvard on real world evidence applications, challenges, and pitfalls. There's clearly a lot of enthusiasm about how we can think about generating evidence from existing data sources more efficiently, and a lot of interest and enthusiasm about finding the way to do that well. From the CMS perspective, Congress made clear with the macro legislation that the U.S. healthcare system needs to shift away from paying for volume to paying for value. And the value equation integrates both cost and quality considerations, but you can't get to value without demonstrating improvements in patient outcomes. Therefore, evidence-based coverage is at the center of CMS's value mission, and devices really must deliver proven benefits to Medicare beneficiaries. CMS has long established and rigorous evidence standards that we apply to assessing public evidence or publicly published evidence, and on how we think about methodologic principles of study design. And for transparency, those principles are referenced in every national coverage decision that we make. What is challenging about the breakthrough space and emerging technology space is that at the time of FDA market authorization, more evidence is often needed to demonstrate that devices really do provide for improved outcomes for Medicare beneficiaries who are often older than 65, often are more complex than the patients that are included in actual clinical studies, often with comorbidities that were excluded. For example, in the tier example that you referenced before, many of the most common comorbidities were explicitly excluded from the COAPT study design. So the result is that more evidence may be needed at the time of FDA market authorization, so that we can really demonstrate that there is a benefit for Medicare beneficiaries in real world use. So the way that I think about real world evidence is that randomized control trials can demonstrate in a very carefully designed environment that technologies are beneficial. In principle, and real world evidence really generates evidence that they deliver in a real world environment with real patients, and often by practitioners that are less experienced with the technology than is true in the context of an academic medical center or a very carefully designed clinical study. There's also an opportunity, I think, in using real world evidence to address some considerations around the public discourse that currently exists around diversity, equity, and inclusion. The nature of randomized controlled trials is that they often have limited numbers of participants and patients, and underrepresented minority populations are often not present in sufficient numbers to draw inferences about whether or not they derive the same benefits. the studied patients did generally. So I think that leveraging real-world evidence to establish generalizability to the Medicare population and also to address issues of including traditionally underrepresented groups is a great benefit there. So I think that CMS recognizes that there are a lot of challenges that manufacturers face when bringing a new technology to market, and we recognize that our beneficiaries have an interest in gaining access to innovation and to new technology, and so we really are working to identify opportunities to decrease regulatory complexity and reduce innovator burden. And so one area that I can speak of, Tamara spoke to the fact that the MCIT regulation is on pause currently while it's being reviewed, and we're trying to work through some of its challenges. But what I can speak to today is coverage with evidence development and opportunities to reduce burden there. So one of the ways in which CMS has traditionally thought or historically thought about real-world evidence applications is through registries, and that information can be incredibly valuable because it has standardized definitions and custom collected data points that are consistently applied to all of the patients that are included in the registry. But we also know that those registries can impose significant burdens on institutions and providers that have to populate the registry. So I think registries are a great opportunity for real-world evidence, but we hope that there will be opportunities to derive some of those data elements to auto-populate registries in the future to reduce burden. And I also think that as we are hearing the public's feedback on burden of registry participation, there are opportunities to streamline the case report form. CMS participates in the Heart Valve Collaboratory, for example, which is a public-private partnership sponsored by the FDA to address various issues in the heart valve space. And I was personally very appreciative of the effort that the HVC invested in streamlining the case report form for TIER, and that effort really helped us to expand TIER coverage to the functional mitral regurgitation indication with coverage with evidence development. So the HVC was able to really evaluate the variables included in the data and make sure that they really were necessary and provided independent information, and there was no duplication. And they successfully substantially decreased the amount of effort required to populate that. And what's important there too is that it was a collaboration across a whole spectrum of stakeholders, from industry to investigators in the academic space to the FDA, and all of those different parties came together to find solutions there. Within the real-world evidence space, I think there remain many open questions about what data sources are acceptable, how linkages can be established while maintaining privacy of patient records, and the methodologies that we can apply to them to draw inferences about outcomes. CMS has been engaged along with the FDA in exploring this space, and we're having a lot of discussion around how we're thinking about these issues and trying to reach a common understanding of how we might approach some of the most important issues in applications of real-world evidence. One issue that I wanted to discuss around real-world evidence that we raised at the forum was in discussing a hypothetical example of a completely fake, made-up, implantable artificial pancreas. So with this hypothetical example, we were exploring the construct of a gap analysis, which could be used to provide feedback to manufacturers on how the evidence that they had available at the time of FDA market authorization relates to the reasonable and necessary evidentiary standard. So how this could be applied to a variety of different scenarios, whether it would be in MCIT down the line or in CED, would be that if a manufacturer achieves FDA market authorization, CMS could then evaluate the evidence that they have available and do a gap analysis and identify specific and actionable areas that CMS feels are needed in order to reach long-term durable coverage at a national or local level, and then provide that feedback directly to the manufacturer so that they can establish a plan on how they're going to close that gap. It is our hope that this approach would decrease uncertainty and provide for greater transparency to device manufacturers so that when they're developing evidence that they have a greater sense of assurance that there's a finite time frame and an agreed upon plan on how they can close those gaps for over the longer term. So CMS, I think, is very interested in exploring the area of how real-world evidence could be used to close gaps that we identify with the gap analysis. And we would consider studies that potentially incorporate real-world evidence, with the caveat that a fit-for-purpose evidence development plan would still need to meet CMS's well-established evidentiary standards. So it would have to be very rigorous, reproducible, valid, and ultimately it would need to be published in the peer-reviewed literature to be incorporated into our evaluation of a technology for durable coverage. So I think that this process could provide a lot more clarity and transparency to manufacturers and will be well received. I look forward to working with manufacturers to see what study designs they develop to close the gap and to make sure that we can reach an agreement on how to address any concerns that we have in application of real-world evidence in real-world situations. So that's a sort of 30,000-foot overview of the forum that we just had with the MDIC and some of the big topics we discussed. Back to you, Joe Carroll.
Thank you, Steve. That was great. And I would encourage anybody who's interested in more information, the April 20th forum is posted on the MDIC website, and I'm hoping we can include the link to that as well in the materials for today. So thank you very much, Steve. I just wanted to add a comment about something that was asked in a meeting I was attending earlier this week that I thought was a very interesting question. Real world evidence, I think people have a pretty good understanding of at this point, but the question was, what is unreal world evidence? And I thought the answer was particularly well put, which was that it's evidence that's not from a formal randomized controlled trial or a specific IRB type approved trial, but it's accrued outside of that environment. And as you said, that is really essential. There's so many things that can change. Something can perform extremely well in a very controlled environment, but under somewhat different circumstances, whether the training of the surgeon or cardiologist isn't quite at the same level, the demographics of the patient population, a lot of the support infrastructure that's needed for successful outcomes in the ICU and follow-up. All of those are factors that can really have an impact on the outcome. And of course, that's really the key. So with that, let's bring Tamara back, and we're going to share a little information about the Medicare Evidence Development and Coverage Advisory Committee, fondly known as MedCAC, and turn it back to you.
So as many of you may already know, MedCAC is a committee that the coverage group and the agency uses to advise us on the quality of the evidence for particular technologies, not specific manufacturer type technologies, but in that space. And so we have, we would like to use that committee more, but in the past few years, we've only been able to probably have 1 or 2 MedCAC meetings. And then I think as we look into the future, we really see that we could utilize this committee more and more to review the quality of the evidence on more technologies, and really try to find some efficiencies with that MedCAC. And as you heard Steve talk earlier, like how can we improve our NCD process? So really taking a look at the NCD process as a whole and figure out what have we not utilized, and figure out how we can pull those tools in to better use them to, again, get to the goal of transparency, predictability, and to a certain extent, and even alignment with the FDA where we can. So with that, I think Steve is going to go through some of the ideas that we're thinking about. And again, as we have mentioned, we are very, very excited that we have a new administrator. And we're very excited to talk with her on how we can use the MedCAC and how we can better utilize the MedCAC in the coverage space. Steve?
Yeah, thank you, Tamara. I think this is an illustration of how public comment can be incredibly helpful. Through the MSIT process, we've had a number of opportunities to get public comments on how we can improve and enhance our review process. And one area that the public has identified is that a MedCAC which can provide more upstream guidance to manufacturers should be incredibly helpful, so that outcomes that are relevant to CMS could be incorporated much earlier in the product development process, such that the evidence available at the time of FDA market authorization is more suitable for Medicare. And so one opportunity with these MedCACs is to pick off or prioritize a series of therapeutic areas and areas that are particularly rapidly evolving, and identify gaps in the existing evidence, and then articulate what outcomes are of particular importance when thinking about whether those technologies are beneficial or not beneficial to our beneficiaries. That was a lot of benefits in one sentence. Okay. But I think, it's crucial that we incorporate the patient perspective in what's important, because, revisiting that whole concept of value at the beginning, I could create an outcome that I think is important, but if the patient doesn't value it, it's not actually delivering on value. So the MedCACs, I think, present an opportunity to bring in the patient perspective, to have patient representatives speak to what matters about a therapeutic area, what's important to them, and so that we can do a better job of making sure that the outcomes that we identify as relevant within therapeutic areas are the ones that patients care about. And in particular, I'm interested in identifying more patient-reported outcomes that we can align with technologies. And this has been an evolving area for some time, and CMS has long had an interest in reporting patient-reported outcomes. But it's been a challenge to capture them consistently, particularly in the real-world evidence context. So that's an area that I think will evolve over the coming years. But I'm hoping that the MedCACs will contribute to this process in decreasing uncertainty and providing greater upstream guidance to manufacturers.
Joe Carroll?
Yeah, thank you very much. I had the privilege of participating in a MedCAC event some years ago. It was a real privilege to be part of that, and it was absolutely fascinating listening to the patients, the professional societies, the evidence experts, and I would encourage anybody who has technology in which they're interested, maybe look in the library of previous MedCACs. There may be something relevant. I think you would find it extremely interesting to see that. So I want to close this afternoon by thanking everybody from our Medicare colleagues, the CMS group. This is our first event such as this in the annual public forum, and I hope that it is not the last. It was really a privilege to have all of you here. Again, thank you very much for your participation. Appreciate it.